Good evening, all, and welcome to this, our second program in year 15 of the Interfaith Discovery Series. We're going to begin tonight with an opening prayer from Reverend Paul McManus, who is the pastor of our host congregation.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. Francis Episcopal Church. It is great to have you all here. It's not too bad in here. I think it's warm enough. Or are you too warm? Is it just right? Good. We have refreshments in the middle of the room. I feel like a stewardess. There's restrooms over here and restrooms back there. Put the oxygen mask on yourself first. So tonight should be a very blessed evening, and I welcome you all and begin with prayer. Gracious God of us all, help us to listen with the eyes of our hearts as we hear different perspectives on prayer. And as we listen, may our hearts be moved to receive even more the language of silence and the words that will help us to express who we are with you and receive who you are with us. So thank you for this opportunity to be in this kind of moment. May you now bless us as we open this evening to engage in a topic of prayer. And we pray all this in your divine name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Let me begin by introducing tonight's panel. On the far side is Reverend Michael Bell, who's the Episcopal chaplain of the Canterbury for 3 more weeks. And then he is leaving our community to be the chaplain at Good Samaritan Hospital. So we wish him well in that. Next, Reverend April Heron, Rolling Hills United Methodist Church. Reverend John Gacci, St. Paul's Lutheran Church, and Reverend Judy Yates-Syker of LMU, who was recently the interim pastor at St. Peter's by the Sea Presbyterian Church for 2 years?
2.5.
2 years, so 2.5 years. So she's spent good time in our community. I am Bob Rothman. And by the way, let me thank Reverend Syker for filling in. Reverend Krause is out of the country right now, and we appreciate your attention. Reverend Krause is not here tonight, but he will be delivering our Dawn Unity lecture on interfaith Bible study. The subject is Abraham, common ancestor of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, ? And as he said in his words, is Abraham indeed the common spiritual ancestor of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, or are there in fact multiple Abrahams, as his characteristics and role are understood quite differently by each of the 3 religions? The Reverend Krause's talk will be given 7:30 Sunday, February 21st at the Rolling Hills United Methodist Church. He's certainly well known, Reverend Krause, not Abraham, to our community as a very respected and informative speaker. And he will be covering material which he teaches in a class at UCLA given by UCLA's Center for the Study of Religion. So there are flyers on the table. Please take one. Please join us. Tonight's topic, what should one expect from prayer? To me, a subject that's very personal and is common to, I believe, all traditions. When we all seek prayer and seek answers for that, I'd like to begin a volunteer from the panel. There are various ways of categorizing prayer, and I think it would be worthwhile to do that first. Who would like to do that? There are 4? Do we go with 4?
We could each take one.
You could each, well,
Sure,
I think it's useful to define the...
Wow, okay. Prayer. An acronym that I sometimes like to use when I'm talking to residents at the Canterbury or others is ACTS, A-C-T-S, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and supplication. That there are many forms of conversation with the divine that people would consider prayerful. One of them is giving praise or glorifying or adoration, just simply God is good, or awe at nature, or gloria, adoration. Confession, as it sounds, a unburdening of yourself, an opening up to the other, and apologizing, perhaps certainly unburdening something that's on your heart. Thanksgiving, pretty straightforward, offering thanks for something that you ought to be thankful for, perhaps we'd say, to the divine, to God. And supplication is a little trickier. Some people don't know the word, but basically a request or an intercession of God when you're praying for someone or something. But those are somewhat, I would say, rational, maybe even Western categorizations of prayer, because there are other cultures and other people that would say prayer can be movement, prayer can be stillness. They don't necessarily, prayer doesn't need to be an action seeking a result. So prayer, I think, can be broadly defined as an intentional engagement with the divine as we understand God.
Anyone have any comments on that? Do those stand?
It's lovely. Good job, Michael.
Hey, someone, I just kicked us off. That's all I have to say.
I would just say that in its broadest sense, prayer is communication with God. Both directions.
Does God hear prayer? All prayer? Let's get started with this stuff here.
Enough of this foolishness. Let's get to the question.
Yes, I think. Does God hear all prayer? Is it necessary to believe that God hears all prayer to pray like this? How do you counsel your flock in this regard?
I think that prayer is communication. I think that you're right about that. I think that where we often err in prayer is that we think we have to have words. We think we have to speak either strongly, loudly, pitifully, compassionately, but we have to have words. And I don't know if any of you has ever done this or not, but sort of formulating the prayer in your head before you say it in your head, as if God doesn't hear that part that you're formulating. So I tend to think of prayer more as a state of openness to that communication, as allowing yourself to be in a moment when not only God can hear you, but you can hear God. And unless both things are happening, I don't think we're praying.
I want to pick up on that, Judy. It's actually a former parishioner at St. Peter's, and she would be delighted if I share this story. Some people in the audience may have known her, but I'll just spare her name for now. But she was actively, intentionally, out loud dying in the midst of our community. And when I asked her how things were going, she said, in a very Swiss-German way, as was her background, "Well, I find it interesting. I'm having trouble with prayer." And I said, "Well, say more about why you're having trouble with prayer. What do you think's going on?" She said, "Well, every time I start to pray," to Judy's point about that formula, I start to pray, I just start having memories instead, and I start remembering all these things. And I then I remember I ought to be praying. And I'm distracted. And I said, it was a moment when I believe God was in it with us, because this is not something I would have necessarily come up with on my own. But I said to her, well, tell me more what these memories are. And she said, well, they're things I've done, they're people I've known. I said, are they mostly pleasant memories? Oh, they're delightful, she said. I just get so lost in it. And then I remember I should be praying. And I said, what if, to your point, Judy, what if what's happening is you've been prayerful for so long and so open to that conversation with God that this is God's gentle way of saying, now let me pray with or for you. In the Christian tradition, we have a scripture that tells us that the Spirit prays through us, even when we don't have the words, for instance. And I said, what if this is, when you begin to be open to God in prayer, what's happening is God's filling your mind with all these beautiful, peaceful, wonderful memories as a way of preparing you for this transition and letting you know it's okay and at peace. Mm-hmm. She said, well, I never thought about it that way. And I said, well, frankly, never had I. But maybe that's what's happening. And maybe this is God's praying with and for you right now. So I see that.
The four of you were really present at very tender times, and I'm sure it has a great emotional take on you as well, to be there and be privileged to be part of such a conversation.
It is, and many of those times, I think, not because we deserve it, but because of the roles that we have. I'll say not because I deserve it. I won't speak for the rest of you. But I feel that way, that people look to us for that kind of strength and that kind of knowledge of how do we pray now? How do we pray through all of this? And it is in those moments that I think words are so futile, and that what I would call, and many call, the ministry of presence is what is most called for. And I don't think sitting in silence with someone is not praying. So I think that we tend to define prayer far too narrowly for something that is as magnificent as a conversation with God.
I'll be the conservative voice. I like words. I think words are really nice, and prayers with words, of course, all of the silent prayers and sitting with folks, those are all wonderful. I sort of like words. And so when we hang out in the Bible, we see this poor little band of disciples hanging out around Jesus, and they say, Jesus, we're just so confused. How do we pray? Mm-hmm. And he says, here's how you pray. Our Father who art in heaven. And here's the start of our Lord's Prayer. So I am so thankful, Michael, that you found your way to get to that point and say, oh, that was God praying his way through you. I probably would have just been my word-loving self and said, let's just keep it really simple. How about the Lord's Prayer? We've got that, if nothing else, at least as a, so I don't have to keep describing myself as this, at least as a liberal mainline Protestant. Here would be my starting spot.
I think that the Lord's Prayer is the perfect place to start, because it is the one place where Jesus taught his disciples and us how to pray. And I think we would do well to pay attention to how that prayer is constructed, because the attention is on God, not on us. And we don't ask, we don't petition anything until we have acknowledged who God is and how majestic God is. And then the petitions come for the basics for our daily bread and for forgiveness, with a reminder that we would forgive others. But just before that, just so we talked about how we're going to do this because we all probably think the same thing, so we're going to
to stir this
point
up.
and counterpoint.
Yeah.
So in regard to your words that you want to use,
I love words.
I think words are great too, but just before Jesus taught them how to pray, he said, don't make a spectacle of yourself when you pray. Just go to your room and pray. And a little later he said, don't be so wordy with your prayers. Don't heap up empty phrases. So, yeah, I agree that words are important, but not all words are important. And so to craft a prayer sort of based on the way Jesus crafted the Lord's Prayer, I have found over the course of years that, when we pray the Lord's Prayer, we all can just fall right in and we just do it and it's rote. And some number of years ago, as I was studying it, it occurred to me, and I do this now whether I'm alone or in a group or leading the Lord's Prayer, that when I get to the passage of thy will be done, thy will be done, it seems so important to me that we recognize that we're talking about God and we're talking about God's will and we're talking about allowing God's will to be manifest in us. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And for me, just the slightest emphasis, whether it's in my head and heart or out loud, that reminds me of what it is I'm actually praying and how I want to be reminded to pray.
I see April about to know there.
I wanted to acknowledge Bob's question of, can anyone pray? Does God hear everyone's prayer? And I'm going to put out an answer, which people can leave on the table or discuss. I'm going to say yes, God hears everyone's prayer. And the angle at which I want to say that is sometimes I have the impression that people think if I say the prayer or their pastor, the clergy says the prayer, it's going to get to God faster and more effectively. And I'm happy to pray with people and for people. It's a great honor and privilege. But I think your prayers go to God's heart equally as mine might.
Our table prayers are not anywhere special compared to the table prayers that would happen coming from someone else. How many potlucks have we had to say the table prayers at?
Well, and I think that's an acknowledgement of our role in the community, and I appreciate that opportunity. And I guess I'm thinking of times where I might get called to a home or a bedside, and I'm thinking of a time when an elderly couple who loved their children were in great distress because one son was separated from his wife, and they asked me to come and pray with them about that. As things came to pass, the couple reconciled, which is a wonderful outcome, and they tried to credit me with that outcome, and I just, that's where I resist. Like, God was working in their lives, and this is an outcome that made you happy, and they look well, and this is all wonderful. But God was, even if we didn't get the outcome we wanted, God was yet at work, and certainly it's possible that the more who pray, the magnification of the love takes place. But please don't give me credit for having some special magic.
I do think that's kind of set up, at least in the Hebrew Scriptures and Christian writings, though, that there's certain people who God listens to more than others. We have Moses making intercessions and God having a special relationship with Jesus, saying certain prayers and things happening as a result of those prayers. I don't disagree with what you're saying. And I think we, in our education with people, sometimes need to grapple with that, how come not everyone in the Bible seems to get same airtime with God. It doesn't seem in certain places that God's listening at all to certain people. Hello, Psalms, hello, exiles, and what have you. So in our own traditions, we have to grapple with that a bit, even if our personal theology, informed by the Scripture and Spirit, has come to be. Of course, God hears all these things. But there would be evidence in our Scripture to suggest maybe not.
Well, and certainly people have an experience that they're, like Mother Teresa even felt the absence of God. Jesus said, "Why have you abandoned?" So people don't always feel God close or sense an answer coming.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean God isn't there or not, isn't hearing.
It seems to me that these last comments touch on something that I think is really important for all of us as we think about prayer, and that is, I think it's a very universal tradition. It's a part of aspects of it are part of our human nature. I mean, even people who don't hold to a certain tradition at some points in their lives call out to whatever else is out there. You just call out to the other, and I think we tend to think about prayer, or maybe our natural inclination with prayer is born out of our need to change things, or to have some control over something, or to have something happen in our lives that we want differently. And if we limit ourselves to that, then I think one of the problems is then we tend to measure the effectiveness of prayer by outcome. And that's playing right into our rational selves, our dualistic natures, and that is really so constrictive to this whole area of prayer, to not be able to let go, because it's, okay, how good was the prayer or the prayer? Well, I'll tell you, that April, she can put families back together. Bring her in next time you got a problem.
I think I heard someone in the audience earlier when we were talking about the Lord's Prayer in the Christian tradition say something about, it's so rote or so formal. And maybe I'm not the only one here that's had the experience of people saying my prayer life has maybe gone dry, or it's not the same, or it just doesn't seem to work for me anymore. And in those times, I tend to liken prayer life to any other relationship with any other person, human. I tend to put it in those terms, saying, your significant other, you don't always, hopefully, just ask things of. You don't approach your significant other with the same rote script every night when they get home, hopefully. Sometimes you just shower them with praise. Sometimes how do you keep that relationship alive over time? And you're not necessarily measuring discrete outcomes. I mean, please take out the trash, you measure a discrete outcome. But building a relationship with someone in that transformative communication takes different forms at different times, and I see our prayer life no different. But sometimes when people get, ourselves included, myself, I should just say that. I know in my own journey over these last few years in my ministry now, I've very much had to alter my prayer styles and forms when I realized, this has become rote. And I fully believe there's a phrase, was it lex orandi, lex credendi? I think, is that, if someone help me if they know this, it's a Latin phrase that basically means the law of prayer becomes the law of belief. Mm-hmm. And that the tradition says if you follow these rote prayers, even sometimes when you don't quite get it or don't believe it, you keep doing that enough, and it begins to inform your belief system. Mm-hmm. Or if you're in a community of people that continue praying the same thing over and over, sometimes they help you come to new understandings of, like, thy will. And when something becomes too rote, and I sense that, I want to vary that up a little bit. I can only imagine God getting bored with hearing the same thing out of my mouth all the time.
Should have had Jesus offer several.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there's another way to feel closer to God, as in Fiddler of the Roof, when Tevye says, "Couldn't you make me a rich man?" I mean, this is talking to a friend. It's not supplication. It's just
conversation.
Yeah.
Or even debate, argument.
It's part of this life. It's bringing God into the man's life.
Yes.
Look at the book of Psalms. I mean, that's a great prayer collection of all emotions and forms of engagement with God. Anger, happiness, joy, petition, debate, or, it's lamentation, yeah. All in one wonderful volume of literature that if you could only pick up one thing, pick up the book of Psalms and explore all these forms of prayer. Granted, they're all words. John will like that. But they're expressing some very vivid forms of engagement with God.
Well, you're talking about a classic statement that made an impact on me. I read when someone said, when I pray, I speak to God. When I read Scripture, God speaks to me. And I think that's where you are.
Interesting. If I can backtrack just a second. Certainly the Psalms are the prayer book of the Bible. This is what Bonhoeffer liked to call it. And when folks are asked the best way to pray, here's how you do it. On day 1, you read Psalm 1. And on day 2, you read Psalm 2. Then on day 3, and you continue. And then once you hit 150, you
start over.
You do it again. I want to push back on the rote question just a bit, if I can. We seem to have, and this has always been the case because we're thinking, breathing, feeling people, we have sort of an expectation that when we pray, we ought to feel something. And it's similar to the same question as the length of our prayer, that if our prayer is extra long, if our prayer uses bigger words, if our gestures are more ecstatic, I'm not throwing stones in any possible way here, if I'm really not, if we just can feel it, then it must have been a real prayer. It must have got to God if I can have some warm fuzzies. But as you mentioned, if God himself in Jesus says, "Why are you so far from me?" and isn't feeling it, if Mother Teresa is not feeling it, we dare not put too much energy into the prayer was more effective, the prayer felt better because I ended up with a strange warming of my heart.
Oh, now you're stepping on the Wesleyans here.
Who learned all of that good stuff from Lutheran pietists, so it's okay.
But there is an aspect now of prayer as discipline and obligation to God. One ought to because God is God, and you ought to. And the notion of praying the offices, for instance, the idea that at any moment of any day there's someone in the world praying, whether they want to or not, or feel anything or not, they're praying on our behalf, is a beautiful image of constant, dutiful engagement with God because God's the creator and we ought to.
And this is the command, pray without ceasing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there is another side to that, the pray without ceasing. The other part is that, is it in Philippians, I think Paul, a good Jew, says to people, you bring everything to God in prayer, and you ought to expect, back to the theme, a peace that surpasses all understanding. If you're praying, if you're bringing everything to God, not just occasionally, but if you're bringing it all to God, there comes, one ought to expect, Paul might have said, some sort of peace. Now, in the midst of praying, perhaps not. You may not feel it, but the fruit of that.
Do you read that as an emotional peace, as a peace that is looming out in the eschaton once heaven comes down? How do you read that peace?
In my ministry, I would never suggest to people that it's out in the eschaton somewhere. Usually they're seeking immediate emotional, physical peace. And that's where I tend to go with that.
Sure, but now as a pastor, that sort of brings up, I imagine, at least the big question for me of the night of, I prayed, where's my peace that passes all understanding? So,
and then we get to beat people up for not praying the right way or not praying enough.
I want it right.
You don't have it yet. So
I want it right now. I want my peace that passes all understanding right now.
Which puts me on a little bit of a soapbox. I'll just throw this out. People can leave it on the table or not. Is the anytime we've mistakenly, I'll go out on a limb and say mistakenly led people to believe that if you pray just the right way, you will get health, wellness, prosperity, etc. from God, that's promised. And if you're not getting it, it's because the implication is you didn't do something right. And I believe in general, religious leaders, particularly in the U.S., particularly in the latter part of this century, have led people astray. That there is an ought entitlement expectation, and the dangerous flip side of that is, and if something's wrong, it goes all the way back to things people believed earlier in time. If something's wrong, it's because something's wrong with you, and that's a dangerous place to be. So I don't think one ought to expect from prayer that it's always up to you to get it right. God's waiting for the right or the frequent or whatever in order to fulfill.
So I think if instead we are telling ourselves and helping others understand that the goal of prayer is not to get something, but to obtain access to God, to be able to hear God, the answer is not always yes. The answer is sometimes no. The answer is often something that you couldn't have thought about. I feel like if I want to use this language in terms of my own personal experience and answered prayers, and I realize that this is all metaphorical. I mean, we're trying to put language on something that can't be contained in language. But in hindsight, when I look back and think about times that I have been desperately thinking I needed or wanted something, and that is not what happened at all, something that I could never have dreamed up on my own ever happens. As I look back, I realized that's where I needed to be. That too is an answer to prayer, I think. But we have to first get past the idea that you ask for something, and then if you get a yes, then you pray like that again. If you don't, then you need to shift the words or change the time or the tone or the prayer partner or something. We spend so much time in rationalizing something that's completely, and I'm going to use this word, but not in a pejorative sense at all, irrational. I mean, we're such post-Enlightenment dualistic thinkers that we bring that into our prayer life. And I think it's only when we allow ourselves non-dualistic thinking, when we allow ourselves to not categorize, judge, analyze, but simply be present in a moment, that we are beginning to experience the richness of prayer. I just feel the strong need to get rid of so many categories.
You're making me think of Ephesians. God can accomplish abundantly far more than we could even ask or imagine. So whatever we're expecting, we're probably way underestimating what's possible in terms of God's movement in our lives and in the world.
Are you, if you're praying for health when you are in a very bad situation, are you entitled to expect an answer of some kind? What are you entitled to? What do you feel has to come back from that so that you feel your prayers were heard or not heard?
I would never use the word entitlement affiliated with prayer. I think the opportunity to be in relationship with God is a great gift, and we can look forward to God hearing and responding in some way, but I don't know that entitlement feels like the right word to put there.
Entitlement has such connotations today. I do want to push a little bit and think of people who engage with God saying, God, you've told us you've created us in your image. You've told us we're part of your family, essentially. We have come to believe you're like a parent and we're the children. There is some I guess, ethical expectation, if we dare go there with God as humans. But if we take that and say, I'm created in God's image, there's something about my limited mortal self that is a reflection of the divine, hold God accountable. There's an ethical thing here. You've put us in this position and you've told us to depend on you. I'm depending on you. I deserve something in response. Entitlement may be a little different, but I would say we're in relationship. Now, does God always have the ultimate say? Of course, but like a parent to a child, when your child is whining and crying and demanding and whatever, a good parent, if we use that kind of language, is not neglectful, but does engage back in some way. There is, if a parent ignores a child, we would call that neglectful. I don't think we would say the child's entitled to parental care, but there's an implicit ethic that the parent will take care of that child, even if the child doesn't understand exactly how it's happening or why. So I don't know. I guess I'm at a place in my spiritual life where I wrestle a little bit with God on this, that you're not so distant, actually.
There's a sense where, if I'm hearing you right, these might be too strong of words, but I'll stick with them anyway. Where, as a part of that relationship with God, we have the opportunity, maybe even responsibility, to hold God accountable sometimes.
It's in our tradition.
We have the ability to hold God accountable to the promises that God has made. I think of the really wonderful stories in the Old Testament with both Abraham and Moses arguing with God and winning the argument. How many people do I need to find in Sodom before you destroy it? 50? What if I find 40? How about 30, 20, 10? If I find 10, okay. Or Moses on Sinai saying, no, please, just because they built the idol, don't destroy them, because what would Egypt say then? And God does what many of us don't imagine God to do, which is relents, changes God's mind.
It would appear so. The unchanging God has a change in some way. Or even more personally, Jesus, in the confrontation, I'll call it, with a non-Jewish woman who approaches Jesus and says, I want to be part of this, basically. And Jesus has a very crass reply. This is not meant for the dogs. And she replies, well, even the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. And it would appear that Jesus then has a change of heart and mind and says, you know what? You're right. You're welcome. What are we to make of that? That to me is an engagement with a very personal God that is responding, not just distant.
Two people pray for healing from deep sickness. One of them makes an offer. If I am healed, I will do good, and define good in various ways, and sincerely means it. Well, the other one just says, please heal me. Does God distinguish between those?
If kids do that to a parent and they're sick, I don't see a parent distinguishing between that. I'm going to heal you or help you become better because that's the right thing to do. If you continue to fulfill what you've said you're going to do, that's wonderful also. But I guess I stopped short of wanting to negotiate as if I'm going to put something on the table with God.
Do you see it as a different level of sincerity?
Not necessarily. You mean on the person praying?
Yes.
It sounds like a person in pain trying desperately to do whatever he or she can do to negotiate with God. I don't see that as a sincerity issue. I see it a place of pain.
Reverend Gotcha, you tantalized me before we started this. Go through our discussion. Go ahead. I don't even want to. I'll let you do the whole thing.
Sure. Well, because I'm of that generation, if you saw me up here with my phone fiddling around before we began, I promise I was not texting anyone. I was actually posting something to Facebook, waiting to...
So much different.
It serves a purpose. It serves a purpose. What I did...
Is God on your Facebook page?
Wouldn't that be wonderful? I actually...
tweet God.
I posted just a quick question to see what sort of data I might be able to gather over the course of this hour and a half. And I did the same thing 2 days ago. I posted on my Facebook page just really simple question. What does prayer do? And I may have phrased the question wrong. It ends up feeling a little bit too pragmatic that prayer has to do something or result in something, but my goal was to incite the Facebook crowds. And I got some really wonderful comments. One of my former students responded by saying, "What does prayer do?" And his response was, "Whatever God says that it does." Okay. One of them, a friend of mine from seminary, apologies in advance, but she said, that's a hell of a question. Fair enough. One of my very thoughtful friends responded, and I find his response just to be incredibly thick. So when we sort of have this conversation...
Do you mean rich and dense, or...
Fair enough. I'll get to it. I found that with this conversation, I wanted much more to ask other people what they thought about prayer and try to steal their thoughts on it, because I found that I didn't have nearly as much to say as I thought I did. So my friend Nick, and he wrote, maybe it has something to do with saying or speaking in ways that both reflect who we are, what we need, love, desire, and care about, but maybe on a deeper level, it's about learning to say and to speak in ways that echo God's needs, loves, desires, and cares. Not because it makes God do something, but because saying it, being involved in the prayer, makes us a certain kind of person. A person that is directed towards God, that's lined up with the needs and the desires, that in our prayers, our grand hope is that what we pray for might actually line up with what God's intentions are. So thanks in absentia to Nick for that response.
I think we often think about prayer as wanting, needing, hoping to change God. And what prayer actually does is to change us. I think, in some ways, I think that's when prayer works, if we can use that language, if we witness a change in ourselves. A couple of thoughts, because if I don't say them now, I'll forget them, and some of you know what I mean, because it'll just go right out there somewhere. Two things. One is to go back to the Philippians passage that we love so much, to pray, not to worry about, not to be anxious, but to pray, and the peace that passes all understanding will guard your heart and mind. The little phrase that we didn't mention that I love in that passage is, and to bring all things before God with thanksgiving. I think if we began out of a sense of gratitude, whatever circumstances we're in, whatever troubles there are, that if you lead with a sense of gratitude, it might be really hard. And so some people just don't pray when things are so tough. They just feel like they've lost the connection, they've lost the relationship, and so why bother? Or not even why bother, but I just can't do this anymore. If we open this conversation, or just open ourselves and our hearts to God in gratitude, it allows us to experience our reality through a different set of lenses. And while it doesn't take the troubles away, it can help us focus on what good things there are. And I know sometimes in the depths of despair, you don't want somebody to tell you, oh, but. No, you don't. And that's not the best response to somebody if they're going through really hard times. Well, but just look at all these good things. It's, and think about this. Not but and. And the whole idea of gratitude is the thing that I hear in the Philippians passage, and that I think is so significant for us. I was picking up a new journal just before the new year. And one, I like just a plain, simply lined journal, but one that I found that I thought was lovely was a journal of gratitude. And it just suggests every day, write down one thing, just one thing in that day that you're grateful for. And imagine being able to go back after a year, whatever kind of year you've had, and to think about 365 things that you've been grateful for in that year. And then I'll hush in just 1 minute, but something else you said that had me thinking is, I think, well, many of us, the promises of God. So, what are we owed? Are we entitled, or, does God owe us something? Are we entitled to expect that? And for me, as I read, especially in the New Testament, I don't see promises of undisturbed peace. I don't see promises of health. I certainly don't see promises of prosperity. What I see and hear the loudest is the promise of God's presence. And I think that when we open ourselves to prayer, we can do it with full assurance that that promise will always be fulfilled. It's not about what the answer is, yes or no, well or not well. It's the promise of God's presence. And that actually is the greatest promise of all, I think. And it takes us beyond some of the categories. Now I'll hush.
Someone can take that to trivial extremes very easily.
Yes, indeed.
There's a story we've probably heard many times about the man who's desperately looking for a parking place. He's got a very important meeting. He's got to be there. It's the very important thing. He's got, please God, if you find me a parking place, I promise to go every week to worship service. I promise to give to the poor. I promise to live oh, never mind, God, I found one. Another way people can trivialize their desires is the bottom of the ninth inning, and the bases are loaded, and the score, it's a close game.
Powerball.
The pitcher is on the mound. God, I want to strike this man out. God, help me. The batter is praying to God, I want to knock this one out of the park. They both can't win. How does God hear those two prayers?
But and if we take it out of baseball, I mean,
oh, I can put it in a lot of different
sure,
ways if you want to.
It has a lot of really big ramifications. I mean, the person who prays desperately for rain to get rid of this drought, if they get their prayer answered, that may be the landslide that kills their neighbor.
Or in our own tradition, asking God to smite your enemies and seeing it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, even God, I have to have this contract. The welfare of my company depends on it, and there's a competitor who has the same problem and needs that contract as well. So you have different people praying for an impossibility. One of them is going to lose, maybe both. Can prayer when prayer is trivialized or selfish, you're not talking about those kinds, and I'm trying to get it over to that, the abuse of prayer, and your thoughts about that. I'm sure you hear plenty of that.
Well, if people are in the habit of praying like that, eventually they're going to notice that God isn't working. It's not the same as ordering something from Amazon or shouting louder than the other person. And then they're going to go in search of some conversation with somebody to think through, like, oh, have I understood this right? Or maybe I'm missing something about prayer. And then we sit in on these really sometimes very heartfelt conversations, like what is it really? And so even if people start out, like if it's not just a good joke, like, you know, if people start out on that level, it's the beginning of a journey that might ultimately take them deeper and farther. So maybe we shouldn't say that even those prayers, like, well, those prayers are useless. Like, maybe they were the start of something. Sometimes
I think we meaning pastors, clergy, might collude in a little bit of that by being too timid in our prayers and being too obtuse and praying for God's will, to be at peace with the outcome, so we can sense your presence, when what someone wants from us is to pray for a miracle, to pray for a cure, to pray for the pain to stop, to pray for my child to come home, to pray for my marriage to be fixed. And I know in my own experience, I've had at least a couple of times when people have been critical of me, saying, why aren't you being more bold in your prayer with me or for me? And in both cases, I'm thinking of the people, it was a loving thing. They felt I was missing out on the fullness of what's possible in prayer with God because I was being a little too distant, a little too careful in my prayers. And later in training with the prayer team, we were taught, use the same words that someone's using in their request for prayer. If they're asking for healing of this cancer, for it to be gone from it, you pray for healing for that cancer to be gone. You don't ask for peace and accepting of whatever will come. You pray against the cancer. And that's something we have a responsibility, I think, always to be in conversation with people about that. Why not pray that boldly? But it can feel awkward at times. It's almost the other side, Bob, of what you're getting at. No, I'm not going to pray for your football team to win. I will pray for God to keep everyone safe on the field and that sort of thing. I'm not going to pray for one team to win. But I'm also, more often than not how do I want to say, put it in the positive, I'm more often now willing to pray very boldly for exactly what we're asking for, hoping that God will actually answer that prayer that way.
And I think that's a key way of how we're valuable companions to each other, when we listen to the cry of someone else's heart and then say it in prayer. I think people, when they feel heard, that in itself is very healing.
I wanted to pick up, Judy, on something you talked about, the change in ourselves, that it doesn't change God so much. We know, years ago before I was in ministry, I was part of a global pharmaceutical company, and we funded an event at NIH on the study of spirituality and medicine, and particularly I went to sessions on studies around the efficacy of prayer and healing. And various studies had been done with people not being aware that someone was praying for them while they were in recovery versus were they aware of it, etc. And then neuroscientists had been watching the brain activity when people were praying or when someone was praying for them. And interestingly, even the researchers at NIH, they came down on saying this was inconclusive. There was neither enough data to suggest it is efficacious, but there's certainly no data to suggest it's not. And they erred for the side of saying there seems to be evidence that prayer makes a difference, certainly in your own brain when you're doing it. That's clear on the data. And it seems to be that when someone is being prayed for or about, there seems to be some impact. and they were having trouble explaining what that is. They stopped short of a causal relationship, but there's some correlation between being prayed for and a physiological response in the other person. So even if we take spirituality and metaphysics off the table for a minute, the way we might, there's some utility maybe we haven't come to understand yet scientifically of that intentional act. Maybe it's a reflection of this relationship being somehow reflective of the relationship with our Creator, that we tap into something, we're open to something when we pray that's yet to be understood scientifically, but it actually is having an effect.
There's been a tremendous amount of energy behind meditation, contemplative prayer, that we've sort of picked up from our Buddhist brothers and sisters who have been practicing these things for millennia. But yes, finding exactly the same thing, that there's a general causal relationship when one prays, when one meditates, when one contemplates. There's less stress, there's less anxiety, even less sickness. It definitely impacts.
It's almost beyond understanding.
Crazy. Yeah.
I had a conversation one time with a nun who, in her great sincerity, was describing the spiritual experience that she had in a silent retreat. And I said, silent? You mean you didn't talk before dinner? No, we didn't talk for 3 days. You said nothing for 3 days? And she says, at the end of those 3 days, I felt so closely bound to everyone else in the group. And that is just so far beyond my ability to understand. But she was absolutely adamant that this has been a tremendous spiritual achievement and enjoyment.
I teach a class at Loyola Marymount called Psychology, Spirituality, and Transformation. And it's an upper division course, so my students are mostly juniors and seniors. But it has been amazing to me to see the response of these young people who are, 19, 20, 21, to the kinds of experiential exercises that I give them. We do a lot of theoretical work, but early on in the class, usually into the second week, after they know a little bit about how I am and how I talk and what I do, and rather high energy, I come into the class and don't say anything to anyone. And then I don't call roll. And then I put on some very soft music for about 3 minutes, maybe 5, still don't say anything. And then I get it softer and softer until there's no sound, no music. And then I leave them there for another 2, 3, 4 minutes. And you can see some of them squirm and twist and wonder, what in the world is she doing now, this crazy woman? And some of them just kind of settle in. And it's amazing how they respond to it. And then we discuss it. And it ranges from being incredibly uncomfortable and, this is not productive, so what are we doing here, to this sense of, and I had a student say this to me last semester, I was really surprised. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want the music to stop. And then when it did, it didn't matter. And I realized it was so nice to be with everybody in the silence. Silence is a real thing. And one of the lessons that I want them to learn from this course is that you have to practice it. Now that sounds like a really dumb thing to say, but you really do. Not all of us are good with silence. And so from my experience just with those young people, and other people that I've known who have gone on spiritual retreats, I think it's a very powerful connector to be caught together, to be wrapped together.
3 days?
Oh, I would just love to have
Wow.
a spiritual
But for 3 days, though, I mean, for the vast majority of us, I imagine that it would take most of us a day to settle into that.
Oh,
2
yeah.
days to settle into that. I don't know if 3 days is long enough. Because it takes so much time and practice to get into a different way of thinking that isn't, and I already said I like my words, but to be non-discursive, to not use your words. It takes such a tremendous amount of time and energy to make that happen, and then to continue practicing it if you want that to be something that's a part of your life. Neuroplasticity requires that you're going to be doing this not just for a week, but for a lifetime, because culture speaks so hard against that quiet time.
Something triggered in me when you talked about what I was seeing is someone's been pedaling really fast on a bicycle, and suddenly you've got to downshift and understand how to bring things to a stillness. And that took me into, I don't know why this took me into the mitzvahs, the idea in the Jewish tradition of, almost every moment of every day, everything that we would otherwise consider mundane has a component of attentiveness to God for that moment. And I know, and I've lost her name, someone who's more literate than I will remember, but the person who wrote the book about spirituality and everyday things like dishwashing and pottery and what have you. And I wonder, therefore, John, for all of us, that if we learn more regularly to be engaged in different ways of praying throughout the day, that transition doesn't take as long. It's just a different mode. But if we've been in one form of prayer or one expectation about prayer for too long, it takes a while to unwind that and get into something else. And when we see people in crisis, if all they've known is that one way of pedaling the bike, it may take a while. They may never quite get off that and enter another state or way of praying. So maybe part of our opportunity is to also, for ourselves, practice and educate others on, every moment of every day can be prayerful in some way. If that becomes your way, then you can pick those modes up faster without having to take 3 days to make a transition. I'm thinking out loud. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
And it makes me think, though we are all very similarly minded, if we had friends or colleagues from, you mentioned Buddhism or Hinduism or Islam, we have so much to learn from every tradition. I think of the writings of Thich Nhat Hanh, one of his books, Peace in Every Step, and it mentions the very same things. It
mindfulness.
Talks about, this mindfulness, this being present to the dishwashing, being present to the dandelion, being present to... It is possible, but it all takes work. And many of us are just too busy to do that. That's our excuse, that's our answer, that's our way of pushing back, I think.
Kathleen Norris is someone who's really helped me with bringing forward ancient parts of our own tradition and celebrating them anew. And one thing that she draws forward from the past about prayer is, I think, gives it a hugely significant place. And that is to say that as a dialogue or a form of unity with God, prayer has the effect of holding the world together. So sometimes those who choose the prayer ministry aspect of the life of the church maybe often feel unseen or not always necessarily valued, but it's possible that work of prayer is keeping the fabric woven together somehow.
That's a nice image.
On the other hand, there becomes a political problem these days. Queen Victoria was the first one I read to wish the troops on the way to India or to Egypt that they would be in her prayers and thoughts. And this being in prayers and thoughts has been a common statement that people make with great sincerity. Recently, after the murders in San Bernardino, many of the politicians on both sides of the aisle said to the surviving families that they were in their thoughts and prayers. And the far left was very upset with that and said that these people have been passive in allowing the gun laws to permit such murders, and they had no right to make that statement, that their prayers were empty. Whereas, of course, someone who believes in prayer, that's not a passive thought. Prayer is a very active thing in wishing people this. And I worry, as the secular left digs in more and more, how this will manifest itself. Anybody want to comment on that one?
I'd push back just slightly on that. I am grateful for all of those who require our yeses to be yes and our noes to be no, who actually expect that prayer is going to mean something, that when we do say a prayer, it is heartfelt, and that's followed up not just by more platitudes, but actually with action, so that our prayers match what our life looks like. So that when we do pray for the families of those who were killed, there's a step 2, that there's a step 3, that we continue then in our work. So I have this quote written down here by Karl Barth, and it's one of my favorites. And the quote is, "To clasp hands in prayer is the beginning of an uprising against the disorder of the world." It's a beginning. It's a great start. But God also calls us into action and movement following that.
In my own ministry, both with people in my public ministry as well as friends and others, I'm more attentive when someone says, "Remember me in your prayers," or "Will you pray for us?" or they just mention something that seems to warrant my response to say pray. And I'm hesitant anymore to just say, "I'm praying for you," because it feels trite sometimes for me to say that. So I try to find other words about what I'm praying for specifically. Gosh, that's awful. I'm going to pray for blah, 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 and add something so that it, at least in my own way, in that moment, trying not to add to what sounds like a passive platitude. Say, I'm praying for it. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not going to stop to also take some action. But I thought of that recently where my family lives, there were tornadoes. And I was very attentive to people who said, we're going to remember all those people in our prayer who were living just miles from where it happened, remembering them in our prayers. Like, get off your butt and go help. Like, do something. Yeah. That's good that you're praying, but that's not enough. And particularly on Facebook, to let everyone know that you're praying so you can look good. Back to the comment that we made earlier about how righteous I am. I'm praying for those people. Sometimes I'm more moved, and I sound judgy when I say this. I imagine God might be a little more moved by people who don't even mention that they're praying, but actually go pray and do something. And on the gun control or anything going on, I hear what John's saying. It's a start, but don't let that be it.
You've been in a religious community for, I don't know how far back, I just know you from the Canterbury and on. As you transition into your next position as a chaplain in a large hospital, I'm sure you will find some who are completely unreligious there. Have you dealt with those before? Do you have experience in that? I'm sure you'll be tested. Can you talk about that?
I'm not sure exactly what the question is, but I certainly...
Do they want any part of you? How do you help them?
I can take a stab.
Yeah, I have had people, I'm thinking of recently, who are very clear they're not religious. They see me in a collar coming, and they want me to know right up front, I don't need that. whatever that represents to them. And
I'm not buying whatever it is.
you know, and in some cases I've gone as far as to pull the collar out and say, then we won't use this. I'm present for you in other ways. And I remember in this particular case, this person and I got to know each other as a relationship, and they began coming to some services, and this person was quick to say, I'm here not because I believe all this, but I'm just curious. And when it came time and she was going through her dying process, we kind of would joke. I'd say, I know you don't want me to pray for you, you don't buy all that, and you don't believe it, but if I in a weak moment were to, is there something you'd want me to include just in case it has some effect? You know, and that's kind of how I approached it. But when people are really hostile, you know, a pastor, then I'm not there for harm, so I'm not going to force that. There may be someone else more appropriate. So part of my role at the hospital as director of pastoral care will be to help find resources for that person. It may not be a clergy at all. It may be another sort of visitor that can come and be present. So yeah, prayer, having said that, I guess I am guilty of still remembering people in prayer even when they don't particularly want me to.
Well, there is the doctrine, might help, can't hurt.
You know, I would rather be judged by God, if we're going to go that far with it, for being too generous with prayer than being stingy or presumptive.
Yeah, I mean, it might help. Might help.
When it comes to praying for people in their presence, I think probably learned from being a chaplain at Children's Hospital in San Diego, and then really adapted it to use even with people who know me when I'm visiting in the congregation, is after whatever length of visit, short or long, I like to conclude with prayer, but I just always say, is it comfortable for you if I say a prayer for you? And most of the time the answer is yes, but on occasion somebody I've just met will say, no, we're good, thanks. And then I honor that, you know, but asking is quite simple to discern what people would appreciate.
You reminded me of, or in my clinical pastoral training in a hospital, I was working in the ICU unit, and I walked by, and you're so anxious at this point to be useful, and, you know, please, someone ask for me as a chaplain. And I walked by a room, a woman who was intubated, and that means a tube is in her throat. She was not able to speak easily, and she motioned for me, and she wants me. So I rushed in there, and she kind of made motion with her hands like she wants prayer. I jumped right into it without clarifying anything, and prayed diligently, and ended with, in the name of Jesus Christ, and pray. And I looked at her and smiled, and she smiled and nodded, and she pointed to her bedside stand, and there was the Quran on the bedside stand. And I looked back at her. She saw the look on my face, and she smiled, and she reached out her hands for a hug, and she hugged me, and she pointed up, and she was like, and I interpreted that, you know, the same God hears that, and it was that presence. But I remember maybe ask some clarifying questions before you just jump into prayer. But I must use this prayer thing.
That's so great. That's great.
Let me ask one more fly in the ointment question. I just seems like that's my role. You guys are all so agreeable and so of one mind with prayer, and I keep trying to dig a little bit, and I'm not getting any traction, so I'm going to try one more time.
It's the Spirit at work.
Let's fight with it.
I mean, there are bad people in the world who are praying for bad things. And I'm sure that the head of ISIS gets up every morning and prays for Allah, for God, to help him on his rounds in making the world a better place to be. Somewhere there has to be some moral judgment on the nature of the prayer that God hears. How does that enter into what God hears.
I rarely do this because I get annoyed by people who cite scripture. I just be honest with you. Sometimes the people throw that out and they say, "Oh,
good stuff in
James 43, whatever." Partly because I'm envious and I am not as apt at doing that. But I did write this one down. The Lord is far from the wicked, but hears the prayer of the righteous. So we therefore, I guess, have to give that to God to determine the wicked and the righteous. That comes from Proverbs. And in the Christian tradition, we have James writing that when you ask, you don't receive because you ask with the wrong motives.
Well,
I can be guilty of what's called proof texting, of lifting these things out of their context and what the author was trying to convey.
And I never met him before tonight.
Right. But there's this. Taking that and being fair and putting it back in context and looking there, I lean back into, again, our tradition that would suggest that God's the arbiter of what's right, wrong, just, or not in the prayer. So, yeah, people may be praying for wicked things. God will sort that out, is kind of where I go with that. And we're at least told by some of our tradition, yeah, God, you can pray that way, but God's not listening to that one.
I'm also struck, not just about motives, absolutely, but by how much our vision of God, what we imagine God to look like, to do, to be, how much that has maybe the primary impact on how we pray. If God is the grand wish giver, well, it's going to sound like that. If God is the God that regularly smites, our prayers are going to read like that. If God is a God of great peace and healing and love, our prayers are going to reflect that as well.
Well, let me give the audience a chance. There's a lot to dig into. Whoever wants to step up, maybe you can do a better job of challenging them than I can.
Hey, Bob.
Yes.
I just pulled up my Facebook again.
Somebody likes the app on
And it's just rattling through numbers now. I just wrote briefly, experiment for my panel tonight. If prayer is important to you, could you like this? And when I just opened it up a minute ago, it was at 61, and now I'm up to 65. So maybe it's just the friends that I have, but I don't.
God, your mom is very active on Facebook tonight, isn't she?
I have eliminated all flat things from my classes.
Oh.
No phone, no pad, no. They all
So,
like that too.
so much cultural digging can be done, though, during class.
Yeah, but it's when the person on the back row is laughing and you're talking about the Great Jewish War of 70.
Okay, that's
I'm
fair.
going,
All right.
this is not, I'm not saying anything funny about the
but
war.
they're very
I'm doing
good at-
something really good on.
They're very good at looking down like this and
Yes,
going
they
down.
It's a whole nother Dawn Unity panel discussion.
Okay, Larry, go ahead.
That's right.
I have a question. All four are Christians. And I think they describe very well Christian prayer. I wish we had a Muslim here and a Jew to talk about how prayer is different in different traditions.
Let me
Good.
Let me take that as my question. Other people have made the same comment, and it's a valid comment. I don't mean to be critical about it. Our principal thought plan is to use local clergy as much as possible. And when you use local clergy, you are left with the fact that most of them are Protestants. And so you can't, if you're going to do that, and I think that's a very important thing to do, you can't have breadth on every panel. You can have some panels where you have breadth. You can have others which, to my mind, when I do the planning here, are more of a personal nature, and the response depends more on the individual. I don't think that prayer necessarily is that different for different faiths, and so that's why that subject is one that does not have breadth. And if you want to look back on the years, every year we've had one or two that have no breadth because that's what we have to do. We also would like to have, as an example, more female clergy. We are blessed with 2 tonight, but we don't pick the clergy around here, so we take those that do have positions here and do the best we can with that.
I wasn't complaining. I was just...
No, I understand. The point is valid. I wish that's one way to go.
As a Jew, don't you pray differently?
I kept trying to get at these people. I'm a little more hard-edged than they are, period. Is that my cultural heritage, my religious heritage, or just that I'm a pain in the neck? I'm not sure which one it is, but I claim all three.
So there's that C, all of the above.
My question goes to perhaps a Muslim practice that I've perceived, and if I'm not understanding it right, I'm hoping someone will correct me, but it goes directly to prayer, and it goes to, you hear the phrase, Inshallah, and it comes out as God willing. And it seems to me in cases where I've seen this, that it means that if something does happen, it really means that one can read it as God was behind it. And it seems to apply whether the thing that came out was a good thing that we might judge as good, or perhaps a success of a terrorist strike. That because your head of ISIS prayed that morning and had a successful attack, that, inshallah, God did will it. And so there's a perception within perhaps the negative side of Islam that believes that, and that seems to be in the religion, but it's hard to distinguish when it works for good or when it might work for bad.
I think that's more a matter of fatalism than it is prayer, and we have certainly fatalism within the Judeo-Christian tradition.
I think you're diminishing their view of prayer when you say fatalism.
Well, that's the way I view it.
I would say, certainly among Christianity, I'm not Jewish, but I'll take a stab at saying same within Judaism. And I think, Judy, you might have gotten to this earlier in the panel when we talk about prayer as an outcome. All of our traditions have been guilty of that. In Christianity, we don't have to look much further than Constantine and then later the Crusades and what have you, that Constantine put a cross on the battle shields of the warriors, not because he was particularly Christian, but because he figured that would help kill more people and win. Yeah, good luck, a good luck charm. And I think people are still doing that. But I hear you that there's perhaps a discipline among certain groups of believers in any tradition that are constantly self-referential in their hope that God is on their side, and God is, if something happens according to their will, that they're in line with God's will. Our country, the whole manifest destiny concept, I mean, we have it embedded in our very DNA as citizens of this country, that when things succeed and you're prosperous and they go your way, that must be God's on your side. And so with some hubris, I would approach that with our friends of any other faith, actually.
I am no authority on Islam, but it seems like it's also possible to hear that as saying, here's my prayer request. But I'm aware that I could be asking for the wrong thing. So it's like, thy will be done.
I heard exactly like thy will be done.
I heard an edge in his question, which was, I want my neighbor to fall down the stairs today, God willing. And if the neighbor falls down the stairs, it can reinforce your belief that that is what God willed, and therefore I need to do more of that type of praying or more of that type of stuff. That's what I heard in your question. Anyway.
I didn't want him to fall down the stairs, but he did.
Right.
So that somehow was within God's will.
Yeah. It goes back to that if...
Well, but we can blame Calvin for that kind of thinking too, can't we?
I will happily blame
Calvin for all sorts of things.
Without questions.
It's like, blame Augustine. I don't know.
Another question. Anywhere? We're a silent group tonight.
I feel so close to everyone in the silence.
There's somebody over here on the end in the front row.
Front row.
Sure. You got to hold your hand up like that.
Oh, well, I was just timidly doing it, but I really like the idea of the silence and the time to absorb in your thinking process. When you ask for God for some assistance or some guidance, there has to be, in my mind, some time to think and reflect on what has been going on in the past or whatever. And I really like your comment about starting in a positive note, because if your mindset is positive, then your mind is open to making some changes, hopefully, that may be relevant. Thank you for all your comments tonight.
I don't know that this is a question, but it seems to me that when you talk, Judy, about silence, that if we're to hear the answer to a prayer, we're going to have to be quiet.
Oh, yes.
And no, they all. I'm talking to them. But I think that quietness is something that's very foreign to people. And even if in church, if it is said, let's take a moment of silence to remember, you can see people start to move around. So I think that the idea of talking about prayer is good, but I think it has to be accompanied by the silence where we listen to see if anything's going to be said. Because if you just pray for what you want and you're not quiet, you'll never know.
So you're a fan of the story of Elijah and the still small voice. God was not in the whirlwind. God was not in the fire. God was in the stillness, the quiet.
And I think that if we take time for silence, we might think a little bit more about where we should go. And for me, that's what prayer is. It's a way to learn within myself where I want to go. It doesn't, I'm talking to God, but I'm not expecting to get an answer. I'm expecting to learn.
It's a great expectation.
All right. Go ahead, Lou.
Two different things. One, on the silence. I read a story once, and the protagonist, I think he was perhaps an Arab, but he said that he was comfortable with his independence because he had herded some stock across the desert for like 8 days without seeing another human being. And I thought that would be really interesting if I could even go a day or two without talking to another human being, because it's really hard in the modern world. Even if you don't have real people, you have television and things. So that was just one comment. And the other is, I remember hearing that there are some prayers which are kind of, because of their implications, not good prayers. You're driving toward your street, and you see the fire trucks going down it, and there's smoke down there. If you say, I pray my house isn't on fire, by implication, you're praying that somebody else's house is on fire. And that's not a good prayer. You're not supposed, at least it was in a Jewish setting that I heard this, Jews are not supposed to make prayers that would harm other people unintentionally, or even unintentionally, much less intentionally.
Okay. Well, anybody want to comment on that? I'll let that be the last. Thank you all for coming. I'll remind you, February 21st is Reverend Krause's lecture on Abraham at Rolling Hills United Methodist Church, and March 1st at Congregation near Tamid is a panel discussion on David. Thank you all for coming.